Yours, sir.
Thank you so much. And I want to start by thanking Erica, Greg, the Signal program, and everyone at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative for having me here today. It's a real honor to be able to be here, especially at this difficult moment for our field, and both for humanitarians, for human rights professionals, and for everyone who uses geospatial data, and everyone who relies on U.S. government support to do it. I had a lot of things I wanted to say to you today, and I'm going to say some of them, but recent events have changed, I think, what I should discuss. Many of you have probably seen as of last Friday that my team, many of whom began at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, our team at the Yale School of Public Health's Humanitarian Research Lab, was terminated by the U.S. Department of State in work we were doing with geospatial data as part of U.S. support for Ukraine. And I want to talk about the context of what happened to our team, and then use that as a doorway to talk about using our team as a microcosm to talk about two things. One, what we are facing now and what we are going to face in the next few years. And then I also want to use that as a doorway to explain some of the history about how we got to this moment as a field, and how some of those historical lessons may help us through this period. So some background, the Yale School of Public Health's Humanitarian Research Lab really came to attention in 2022 when we were selected by the U.S. State Department as part of a new program called the Conflict Observatory. And the Conflict Observatory really had its roots at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and the Signal program on human security and technology. The Conflict Observatory was set up by the Conflict Stabilization Operations Bureau at the U.S. Department of State to really be what was the Satellite Sentinel project that began in 2011 at HHI on steroids. And it was the first time that the U.S. government gave access to the commercial constellation of satellites to attempt to document crimes in a war even before the war started. And so we began to stand up in February 2022 to try to pre-position our collections of imagery and our collections of open source data to document what we thought was going to happen in Ukraine before the war even started. And so for 3 years, we really focused on three big areas. One is children, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second is classic battle damage analysis, bomb damage analysis at a very large scale of special protected objects, such as hospitals, schools, crop storage facilities, transportation infrastructure. And then the third is focused on basically large-scale detention facilities, trying to track where civilians from Ukraine were taken both within occupied territories and within Russia. And what we were documenting was being done with the U.S. Department of Justice, with the Office of the Prosecutor General in Ukraine, and with the International Criminal Court in near real time. And so we were able to collect imagery, fuse it with open source information, and to move those products to prosecutors, not in years, but in days and weeks, and then sometimes to be able to produce maps of trends of attacks as those attacks were still happening. And so the notable success of the program is that we led to the indictment of Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova in basically 2 years ago yesterday for the war crimes of deporting children forcibly from Ukraine to Russia into a system of re-education camps, and as we would later document, forced fostering and adoption. And geospatial solutions were essential in being able to track those children. And so what we were doing is taking selfies that Russian officials who were transporting the kids, in many cases by bus or by plane, were taking with the kids as they were brought to midpoint locations or to re-education camps. We extracted metadata from those photos and began to build a tasking plan for satellites to collect more information about those facilities where the children were being held. And that allowed us to show a systematic, intentional network of forced deportation in violation of specifically the Geneva Conventions. And the Geneva Conventions hold that children are have a special protected status in war, and they cannot be used as basically hostages or bargaining chips. And so what was radical about Conflict Observatory is that it gave us four things we had always dreamed of having since the days of Satellite Sentinel, which I'll talk about in a second. We'd always dreamed of having one, as unlimited access as possible, not only to very high resolution imagery, but synthetic aperture radar. In some cases, data about telecommunications, data about advertising, online advertising data. The second, to have a safe storage environment to be able to put the evidence we collected and the evidence we were building into one repository. The third thing is to have, which we did until U.S. sanctions in the Trump administration canceled it, to have a formal sharing relationship with the International Criminal Court. And so this program was to my knowledge, the only United States entity that was sharing geospatial data and derived products with the International Criminal Court in real time. And the fourth thing it had, which was really unique, is a consortium of partners. It wasn't just Yale. It involved the Smithsonian in the beginning and specialists in creating algorithms. And we had Esri as part of the initial consortium. And so it was a real collection of different types of often geospatially specific skills, from companies to academics to NGOs. And so in the course of those 3 years, we not only led to the Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova indictments, but also 4 additional indictments, 2 for war crimes and 2 for crimes against humanity, related to a geospatial mapping of Russia's alleged attacks on civilian power generation infrastructure in Ukraine. And so we were, within a week of the release of that report, the ICC moved on indictments against 2 officers in the Russian military, one an admiral, one a general, and then basically several weeks later indicted the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff of the Army for crimes against humanity. And what was critical in the analysis that we were doing in support of those indictments is we were able to show that Russia was hitting areas far outside the front line and we were able to show the geospatial distribution of attacks. And we're particularly excited about what that analysis means for the future of spatial methods and technologies for peace, for the documentation of crimes, because it was a combination of the two things that really the Conflict Observatory was about. One is being able to do rapid incidental collection of specific incidents, like a specific airstrike, but then be able to have the bandwidth and the level of analytic, human and computing analytic capability to turn those incidents into trend maps to a standard, a chain of custody standard that allowed it to be admissible in court. And so that's the good news. The bad news is on Friday, the New Republic and other outlets reported that the Trump administration canceled our program as we were in the process of transferring all of this geospatial data and open source data to Europol, to the European police agency, to have that data live with them in perpetuity to support primarily Ukrainian domestic prosecutions, but also future prosecutions by any tribunal and by the International Criminal Court. In the next few hours today, there's going to be additional news about this, which unfortunately, even if it was out already, I can't discuss. But you are going to see a lot of attention on what happened and why to our program. And that's really one important thing I want to talk about before I go back in time, because it's not just about our program, it's about all of us. What we do with geospatial data, especially when it is being done in the context of armed conflicts, is very frightening, often to people in power, because what we are doing is providing an often otherwise unavailable empirical insight into the both the actions of alleged perpetrators that can otherwise not be derived from other data, but we're also showing the impact of alleged crimes on populations over time, and in a way, in often a speed during conflicts that is not achievable by other means. And so it is because of the objectivity that we all work towards. It's because of our effort to work on behalf of vulnerable people through principles, the humanitarian principles of neutrality, humanity, impartiality, etc., that we become political. Often, as we strive to transcend politics or avoid politics as a field, we end up smack dab in the middle of politics. And so what I want to say to you is that there is an impulse right now, as funding shrinks, as resources, including access to data, access to partnerships, access to platforms, and then access to cold hard cash to be able to pay yourself and pay your people, as that is shrinking because of the cuts to USAID and US foreign assistance and the follow-on effects, you will feel a strong impulse to do a couple things. To not do politically controversial projects, to avoid mapping things in Gaza, for example. You will feel an impulse to say less than the whole truth about what your data shows. You will try to make people feel comfortable in many cases, and you will want to often comply in advance to what you think the remaining limited pool of funders want. And what I want to say to you today, my message is don't do it. Do not, in this time of constrained resources, change what populations you work on. Do not change the degree to which you tell the truth based on what your findings show. And do not twist yourself into a pretzel because you're scared you're going to lose money. It is better to lose money and go out of business than create a sector, especially in the critical work we do with this unique type of documentation and, yes, truth telling. If you comply, if you contract the space in which we work, if you do not choose to support the populations based on the humanitarian imperative of need, rather than who's going to give you money, then you are complicit. And so we have an essential role to play as a sector right now, because as money declines for ground-based response, as access to non-permissive environments contracts even further, as conflict spreads, and as spreads because of a lack of resources to respond preventatively and after the fact, we will be called on more and more to step in to provide early warning, to provide emergency response, decision support, and to provide accountability. We cannot shrink in the face of what the populations we serve demand of us, which is to tell the truth. And to tell the truth consistent with the humanitarian principles means that we have to act based on need, even if the funding isn't there. While we were doing Ukraine, we were also documenting attacks on hospitals in Gaza. With Ukraine, we had millions of dollars. With Gaza, we had no money. But we knew that the need for our mapping of attacks on hospitals through the humanitarian principles required us to do Gaza even if we weren't paid for it. And that was a really important lesson, is that yes, we need to follow the money so we can keep doing our work, but we also have to, like we are distributing food on the ground, as we build maps, as we build products, as we build systems, also be thinking about how do we act based on need. And in that attempt to avoid politics, to transcend politics, we become inherently political as a field. As I said at the beginning, there was a lot of things I wanted to discuss today, including our history, and probably Erica covered it and did it better than I could. But I thought it was really important, especially given the news that will be coming out in the next few hours about our team here and how and why we were terminated, to really try to communicate to all of you both a note of solidarity, but also a challenge, and a challenge for us not to give up, not to give in, and not to have our values dictated by what we're scared of happening. And so we've lost our money. We may have to terminate most, if not all, of our staff in the next 2 weeks. And I couldn't be prouder. And so now I'll just do the historical note to close, because I have only a couple minutes left. everything we've accomplished now is because of where we started at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, because of the risk that Dr. Mike Van Rooyen, Enzo Ballatino, Dr. Enzo Ballatino, and so many took with us when me and Isaac Baker walked in with a check from George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and Don Cheadle from the cast of Ocean's 11, and said, we're going to monitor attacks of the movie star using commercial satellite imagery, which had never been done before at that scale, in Sudan and South Sudan. And HHI gave us a space to do something which was crazy, and it worked. And out of that, we were able to build Signal and move from that experiment, which Satellite Sentinel was, using commercial satellite imagery to document attacks on civilians during the partition of Sudan, South Sudan. And we moved from there into developing standards and ethics. And the conference we're at today is really an outgrowth of that journey, from an experiment to professionalization, and now to training and scholarship and sharing those insights. And so at a moment where I could be pretty depressed, I feel very happy that seeds that we planted as a community here 14 years ago have grown in so many ways we never could have predicted. At the heart of it was courage. The courage to try, the courage to risk, and the courage to stand our ground when all the politics seem to say, give up. So here's my closing note. Don't give up. Keep choosing the hard projects. Choose the controversial ones. Do the maps no one's going to make. Work with the communities no one's talking to. Do the 1 hour at night on that crazy project you think won't matter. Because maybe it won't, but maybe it will. And when we stop trying, the world will look like a world where people are not trying to ensure that the capabilities we have are given to the people who need them most, often on the worst days of their life. Thank you.
Natty, thank you so much for that. And